where we started talking about the 4 ways of harvesting trees. We talked about ecosystem services yesterday, so why trees are really, really important and why we need them. One of the major reasons is that we need trees for construction material, so we need them for lumber. And so there are 4 main ways in which we can go into, or a lumber or timber company can go into a forest and remove the trees. And the first one we said yesterday was selective cutting. And if you look at the picture, it's going to help to explain what selective cutting is. So if you look at this, it says here that we are going to remove older mature trees and leave most of the forest intact. So that's what we can see from the picture. So it says good for the environment. It's not profitable short term. Yeah, so you can see some of the tree stumps will grow back. This is good for the environment because it reduces soil erosion because the roots of the trees are going to hold the soil in place. And it's also good for biodiversity. So we're going to keep their habitat mostly intact. The next one is called shelter wood cutting. And shelter wood cutting is going to take time. So this is a process that happens over a period of decades. So that's the way that you can kind of remember this one compared to the other one. But it says the removal of mature trees in an area over time. More trees are cut than in selective cutting. But it's better for the environment than the next 2 ways that we're going to look at. And so with shelter wood cutting, what's going to happen is that a timber or a lumber company is going to go into a forest. They're going to analyze a patch of land. The first year, the first time that they enter the forest, they are going to remove trees that are unwanted and unneeded. So dead trees, tall trees that they're not going to use for harvesting. Then they're going to wait a decade or so, and then they're going to go into the forest and remove the very tall, mature trees and leave a few trees to shelter the young trees. So this picture kind of shows you the tall trees and then the younger trees that are left behind. And so the timber company is going to go in and remove just the tall, mature trees, leaving a few behind and using that lumber. Then the timber company is going to leave the forest for about another decade or so. And it's going to give time for the smaller trees, the young trees, to grow and become the mature trees. And then again, the timber company is going to go in and remove most of the mature trees, leaving some behind to shelter the small ones. So what you should know about this is it takes a period of time. It's going to be over decades. It's more profitable than selective cutting. But it's a little bit worse for the environment because we're going to have even-aged trees that we're removing at each decade. The next one is called seed tree cutting, and this one's really easy. Basically, we're going to remove most of the trees in the forest. You can see the stumps here representing the removed trees. And just leave a couple behind to provide seeds for the next generation of trees. So almost all trees are harvested, and then there's going to be some regeneration from the trees that are left. And it's almost like the opposite of selective cutting. Do you guys want to say hi to people? No. My second period doesn't like you. Yep. Sure. I'm going to show you all 4 of them together, and we'll review them side by side. And then the last main way of harvesting trees is actually the worst for the environment, the one that we're going to look at. It's most profitable. Can you take a guess of what it is? You've probably heard of this before. What is it, Alec? Yeah, so it's cutting down all of them, but it has a name. Like you go into a forest and you remove all the trees at one time. Okay, it's part of deforestation. Yes, it's a process that's happening, but it starts with yeah, clear cutting. So the last main way, the most common and the most profitable, is called clear cutting. And so clear cutting is when we have the removal of all trees in an area. This is the most profitable for a timber company or a lumber company, and it is the worst for the environment compared to the other three. And you can see some pictures of some areas that are clear cut. So at the bottom left-hand corner, if we have clear cutting that occurs on the side of a hill or a mountain, many times it's very difficult for that forest to regenerate because if there's soil erosion and no soil present, then trees cannot grow. So it says here over a large area. So small amounts of clear cutting can actually be beneficial for a forest. There are some organisms that actually thrive when succession is taking place. Now what happens with clear cutting is that it's done over a large area. After clear cutting takes place, either the trees or the seeds will regenerate themselves, or they have to be purposely planted. But of the four, again, this is the most harmful to the environment. We're going to have loss of biodiversity. We're going to increase erosion. But it's the most profitable because a timber company is going to get most of the wood. So they're going to be able to sell that for a profit, make it into something that's useful. To contrast all four of them, there's a picture in your textbook. Looks like this. And it just briefly goes through that. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, again, that's selective cutting. Here we have older, mature trees that are selectively harvested from time to time, and it allows the forest to regenerate. Again, this is the best for the environment as far as erosion and biodiversity, but it is not profitable for a timber company. The next one we talked about is shelter wood cutting. It says less desirable and dead trees are harvested. As younger trees mature, they produce seedlings which continue to grow as the now mature trees are harvested. So for this one, remember it's over a period of time. We're thinking like decades. You can see that you have even aged trees, like all the tall mature trees, and then we have a set of younger trees. So if you had to identify in the picture, you can see that it's very different from the other three. It's better for the timber company than, say, selective cutting, and it's just slightly worse for the environment because we are removing a significant number of trees. And then we have the seed tree cutting, which is in the bottom left-hand corner. Again, the timber company is going to come in and remove most of the trees, leaving a few trees behind to provide seeds for regrowth of the forest. And then the bottom right is going to be the clear cutting. And that is going to be the most profitable for a timber company, but the most harmful to the environment. And again, if it's done on the side of a hill or the side of a mountain, many times the soil is going to erode, leaving no soil, no nutrients for trees to regenerate. So it can cause kind of like desert. Okay, so deforestation. I don't know, what's deforestation? That's not your seat, is it? Go back to your seat. In front of Geneva. So deforestation. If you had to come up with a definition, what could you say? You're teaching to a little kid. Is it good? Is it bad? What is it? Super easy. It's bad. Good job. The removal of trees. So it's the permanent or temporary removal of trees in an area. What are some of the reasons why trees and forests are cut down? So we just said for one example, for lumber, for building materials. What else? Why else are they removed? Or why else? Yeah. Okay, for construction, for urbanization, for agricultural lands. So some of the reasons why deforestation is the biggest threat to our forests due to fires. So they could be purposely lit or accidental fires. Think like Smokey the Bear. That can remove large tracts of trees. Agriculture. All of this goes back and relates to our increase in human population. So the more people on Earth, the more food we need. Large tracts of forests and trees are being removed to have agricultural land so we can grow crops. Even for pasture land so we could have animals graze. The construction of roads, buildings, urban areas, again, relates back to human population growth. If you guys remember, I told you in the beginning of the school year, the number one centralized problem in this class is overpopulation. The more people, the more land we need, the more food we need, the more waste we produce. So construction of roads, which relates to just urbanization in general. Harvesting trees, which we just talked about. We need the lumber from the trees to make wood and paper products. And if we are having tree farms that are unsustainable, monocultures, then we can have the spread of diseases and insects that can wipe out the trees. Some of the effects that we see is a decreased soil fertility. So if there are no trees present, there are less leaves and organic material that are going to make the soil nutrient rich, so it decreases the soil fertility. It can cause uncontrolled soil erosion. Again, the roots of the trees are going to hold the soil in place. And so if the trees are removed, the soil can erode. And there we have some soil erosion in the bottom left-hand corner. Increased sedimentation in waterways. So we talked about this as part of the water pollution chapter as one of the main 8 water pollutants. We said that as soil or sediment moves into waterways, it can make the water turbid. We talked about reduction in light penetration, so you have less aquatic organisms and plants living at the bottom of a lake or a river. We also talked about sedimentation building up behind a dam. So over time, when we have sediment or pollution or erosion of soil, it's going to go into waterways. It can build up behind a dam. And therefore, there's going to be a point when a dam can no longer be used because there's going to be so much sediment that's built behind the dam, and there's not going to be water in the reservoir. Formation of deserts. Yesterday we talked about how forests and trees aid in the hydrologic cycle. We said transpiration of water is going to go into the atmosphere, forming clouds, and then the clouds are going to eventually precipitate that liquid down. No trees, less precipitation, and there's a desert. No trees, we're not going to have habitats for wildlife. Again, the number one reason why animals go extinct or become endangered is loss of habitat. So no trees, loss of species. And then the last one, global climate changes. We also said yesterday that trees are going to provide us with ecosystem services, such as taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's going to help to mitigate or slow global climate warming. So trees act as carbon sinks. You can see the picture at the bottom left-hand corner. So deforestation is bad, is the point. Right, Bruno? Okay, forest trends. So if you look back at this pie chart, we looked at one very similar in the beginning of the chapter. We looked at land that was owned in the United States. You should know this 57% and this 20% for federal government. So 57% of our forests happen to fall on land that's privately owned. 20% is going to be part of our U.S. forest system. 15% of our forests fall on land that's owned by corporations, and 8% fall on state and local government land. But this is concerning, this 57%, which is even greater now because your book is old. And the reason why we get nervous with trees and forests on private land is that people have the right to do whatever they want with that land, meaning that they can remove tracts of forests. And many people who own land that contain forests are under economic pressure to develop the land. So for example, let's say that Matt here owns land. We'll pretend like the classroom is the land. And it has tracts of forest on the land. And he really wants to develop that land into a shopping mall. He's like, oh, I'm going to build a huge shopping mall, remove all the trees, and I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'm going to make a profit from this land. And that's what the concern is with private individuals. So because of this way of thinking, in 1990, part of the Farm Bill, there was a program called the Forest Legacy Program that was established. And what it says is that for landowners just like Matt, that the federal government will pay him money to not develop the land, if that makes sense. So what he's going to do is he's going to sell his rights to the federal government to develop the land. So again, this is the classroom is his land. He has forest on the land. And in order for the federal government to try and help save the forests in the United States, they're willing to pay the landowner money to not develop and remove the trees and to develop it into something that, I don't know, it's going to cause deforestation. And it can be a small part of the land. So in this classroom, it could just be like a corner, or it could be all of the land. And there's a period of time that's set. So he's going to sign a legal agreement called a conservation easement. It's a legal document that's going to say that he can't develop the land for a certain period of time. It could be 50 years, it could be 100 years, it could be 20 years. And so let's just say that he decides he's going to do this for 50 years. He's going to be paid by the federal government for 50 years to not develop the land. After the 50 years, he can do whatever he wants with the land. If he decides to sell the land to Andrew, let's say 25 years in, Andrew also cannot develop the land for another 25 years. So the whole idea behind the Forest Legacy Program is to save the land. I'm not sure if he would get paid or if he would know that this is going to happen. Like if you know that someone's part of this program and you're looking to buy the land, you may not want to buy it because his purpose may be to build something. So if you're going to build something, you probably wouldn't want to buy land with someone who owns or is part of the Forest Legacy Program. Yeah, there's a lot of people who do it. And the reason why is because they may not want to remove the trees and the forest on their land, but there's a lot of economic pressure to do so. It's expensive to own the land. And so it's finally at some point maybe they need to develop it. So if they're going to get paid to not develop it, then they're willing to leave the forest intact. And so this was a move by the federal government to try and keep forests on privately owned lands intact so that they're not being cut down and developed. That's pretty smart. All right, so moving on to our national forests, just like we talked about our wildlife refuges, national parks, we discussed the wilderness areas. U.S. national forests, you should know, are overseen by the U.S. Forest Service. Here's a little of a symbol for them. Under the Department of the Interior, also part of the Bureau of Land Management. The BLM and the U.S. Forest Service oversees national forests. You may think that national forests are protected, pristine forests in the United States. You can kind of see where they're located in the map, but they're actually not. Our forests are used. They're used as a natural resource. So they're managed you can use them for recreation, but we are going to harvest trees. They're used for mining, exploration of fossil fuels. So they're not really that preserved thing that people think in their mind. Oh, a national forest, I'm sure that all the trees are beautiful and everything's kept intact. They're actually used to remove the trees and to remove the natural resources. So managed for hunting, mining, recreation, timber harvesting. So we actually use the natural resources in a national forest. Now we try and use them sustainably. We don't go through the national forest and clear cut all of the trees. We cut patches at a time, but we actually use trees. There's a lot of controversy surrounding national forests because the roads that logging companies use to get into the forest to cut down the trees are paid for by taxpayers. So if I'm an environmentalist and I do not agree with trees being removed and logged in a national forest, I am essentially paying for the roads for loggers to get into a national forest. So there's like some controversy surrounding that. Like, I don't feel like I should have to pay for that. I don't agree with it, but we end up paying for it. Oh, and there's me hugging a tree. Save your tree. I'm probably not supposed to be touching this tree. Okay. So forest trends throughout the world. Looking at tropical rainforests and tropical dry forests. We only have one more slide after this. So for your tropical rainforests, they're highlighted in green here. Just note that tropical forests are any trees and forests that are located in the tropics. So think around the equator. Here's the equator. Any forest located around the equator are considered tropical forests. A tropical rainforest is a forest that's going to receive more than 200 centimeters of precipitation per year. We talked about this in our biome chapter, so this should be review. But a tropical rainforest is going to receive more than 200 centimeters of precipitation per year. A tropical dry forest is a forest that's going to be in the tropics, but it's just going to receive less than 200 centimeters per year. And today we'll talk about tropical rainforests. Tomorrow we'll discuss tropical dry forests. So looking where they're located, we can see the Amazon in Brazil, the Congo, and the forest through Indonesia. There are many reasons as to why they're being cut down. Let's start with subsistence agriculture. So why are tropical rainforests disappearing? Notice that rainforest is underlined. Rain. 60% of our forests, tropical rainforests, are being cut down by subsistence agriculture. What is subsistence agriculture? Think like AP Human. So anyone remember what this is? Subsistence agriculture. Exactly. It's farming enough food for yourself and your family. So family produces just enough food to feed itself. Many times it's done by the process of slash and burn. So this guy right here, if you look, he's cutting down or removing the trees and then lighting them on fire. And that's just showing you slash and burn. And this is something that happens especially in Brazil. I think I mentioned before that about 5% of the farmers own 70% of the land. So people who live there don't have their own land to grow crops. And so what they end up doing is moving into the Amazon and cutting down the trees by the process of slash and burn. In the 1950s, the Brazilian government basically built a road directly through the Amazon, causing habitat fragmentation. And now it gives loggers a way to get into the center of the forest and to move outward versus from the outskirts moving inward. And many times, subsistence farmers are going to follow the loggers. So the roads that have been built, the paths that have been made, subsistence farmers are going to follow them into the forest. They're going to cut down the trees. They're going to light the trees on fire, as this guy is. All of the nutrients in the leaves of the trees are going to go up into the atmosphere. It's going to fall down onto the soil, therefore causing the soil to be nutrient rich. The farmer's going to plant his first set of crops. He's going to get a really high yield. He's going to have enough food for his family. And then he's going to try and use that land as much as he can until he basically runs out of nutrients for the land. So he doesn't have bagged fertilizers, and he's removing the crop, which contains the nutrients, and eating it and giving it to his family. And what he's going to have to do is get up and move to a different part of the forest. And so that's called shifting cultivation. We'll talk more about that next chapter. But going into the forest, practicing slash and burn, the soil is not nutrient rich anymore, so they have to get up and shift or move to a different spot. And that's all part of subsistence agriculture. Another main cause of the deforestation in tropical rainforests is commercial logging and lumber. So in Brazil and many of these countries, all the trees are being cut down and exported to highly developed countries where it's being produced into products that we use. And then the last one is for cattle ranching and agriculture for export. So large, vast tracts of forests are being removed for plantation style like agriculture. So these are the main reasons in our tropics why the tropical rainforests are being removed.